I'm afraid I have HIV, and I gave it to all these people. And I just felt like, oh my God, I want to just die. I had 30 years of federal prison looming over my head. I just had an abortion. I had an affair on my husband. There was never a moment that I was not in excruciating emotional pain, and I could not drink or use enough drugs to escape that. I hated myself. Is with addiction, and why it's so tragic is people, they die before they hit a bottom. When he told me that service heals the spirit, I had this awakening, this aha moment. Oh my God, I finally found my purpose, service, and finally understand. This is what's been missing my whole recovered life. The past 20 years of, yes, I've got clean and sober. I had like a mediocre existence. I was very self-centered. I was still very selfish. Here I am. I live in this state of doing my best to surrender and trust in every moment, all the time, living and coming from love and not fear to the best of my ability, being as mindfully present as I can, living of service, showing up in service, showing up intentionally.
I call this podcast is really extraordinarily inspiring stories or conversations from ordinary people like you and I. Let your light shine. Help others find their way out of the darkness. Natalie, I read yesterday, I was reading all your posts, not all, a lot of your posts. I was so inspired. I love to hear your story, like in person.
Well, thank you for this opportunity and for what you do in the world. I got sent to 2 drug rehabs when I was 17 years old. I spent my whole last year of high school in rehab. And at 18 years old, I was in Alcoholics Anonymous, a 12-step program. And so at that time, 17, I already knew I was an alcoholic and drug addict, and had already had major consequences in my life that led me to being put in rehab at those ages, arrests and things. I ended up not staying clean and sober at that time. For maybe 6 months when I got out of the rehab, and then I decided to start partying, drinking, and using again. And, you bring up that very specific story. So I'll bring that in because I trust the flow of this conversation, because again, there's so many aspects to touch on. But, my first drug was boys, having crushes on boys in school, and then it never being realized. And me growing up as a kid and young teenager, thinking I'm ugly, thinking, I'll never have a boyfriend. And yet my whole interior life was consumed with having these secret crushes that I could never tell anyone, not even my best friends. And then finally, when I started using drugs, I whatever, got a little attractive, I guess, or something. But then I started realizing that my body was currency, that I could give myself away sexually in a way to try and get love. So and then also the combination of using and drinking led me to do stupid things sexually, making decisions I would never normally make, sleeping around basically, and not being safe. And so I say all that to say that this specific story about this boyfriend that you read about, it's called The Power of Secrets and Lies, is the blog post. I had this fear that I had got HIV. This was in the mid 90s. So back then, HIV, it was a very, very scary thing. And I mean, it still is, but they've come a long way now. But back then it was a very big deal. So I just had this fear that I had it. And yet, because of my addiction and just where I was like not going to get tested because I was too scared. I was too scared if it was positive. Oh my God, what am I going to do? So I would rather live in fear and just think I have it rather than just getting tested. So as a result of that, I'm living with my boyfriend. He was the love of my life at that time, my first love. We were living together for 2.5 years. And I just was like, I can't live like this. But yet I could not get tested, or I would not. So I decided instead I want to die and I'm going to run away. And I'll just die somehow if I just run away, have this death wish mission. So I was in Florida. I went all the way to California, which is a very long way. And I didn't tell anybody where I went. And I was missing. My parents hired a private investigator to try and find me. I mean, it was awful. And then of course, my boyfriend comes home one day to a note. I'm sorry, I had to leave. I love you. You know, something. I didn't tell him the truth. And yeah, so I mean, that we could talk the whole time about that story, but suffice it to say that it was hell on earth. In many, many ways. I lived through it. I'm lucky because I went to Southern California, which is one of the most dangerous places in the US. And, you know, I'm 22, young. Nobody knows where I am on the entire planet. And I fall in with these very heavy drug using crowds and gangsters and guns. And it was a very traumatic experience that I lived through. I got arrested is what happened. And then I went home to my mother, which was the last place on earth I wanted to be, is back home. You know, I wanted to die, and yet that didn't happen. And I didn't, you know, do anything. I didn't try. So I came home. I started working in a pharmacy, which is not a great idea for a drug addict. So I started stealing everything. I mean, the hole in my soul, the pain that I felt, there was never a moment that I was not in excruciating emotional pain, and I could not drink or use enough drugs to escape that. I hated myself. I didn't think it was possible for somebody to feel that low about themselves, and yet I did. So I hatched a plan to escape that situation. There was a whole bottle of 500 pills that had high street value. So I took the entire bottle from the pharmacy, knowing I was committing a major crime, when before I had just taken here and there, you know, things that I could just get high off of. I saw a bottle of 500 pills. I took it, and long story short, I got arrested on federal drug charges. My father turned me in. My mom found the pills in my room. My father called the pharmacy, and yeah, so I got arrested. I spent 11 days in jail. And during that time, I asked for a pregnancy test because I knew that I had gotten pregnant. This is my, you know, the depths of my alcohol and drug addiction, which thankfully, hopefully ended. I'm about to get clean and sober, like, after that experience, but I'm just sharing, like, this is the bottom. This is the worst of the worst. I was pregnant and I didn't want to have a baby. So the guy I was dating after I got out of jail took me to get an abortion a few days after I get out. And then a few days after that, I went back to meetings, 12-step meetings, because I had these drug charges, and my lawyer had said, you can't get into any trouble or you're going to, like, federal prison for up to 30 years. So I went back to the program, the 12-step program I'd been in before, and this time I was ready. So that was February 1999.
Wow. What program? The government program?
AA. Do you know AA? Oh, okay. It's a very famous recovery program, if you will. It's support groups all over the world. It's the biggest way, it's the most popular way for people to get clean and sober off of alcohol and drugs, that uses a process called the 12 steps to heal heal the internal and the external, cleaning up our lives after addiction. So it actually creates a spiritual awakening, which is necessary for recovery. But the 12-step process can be used by anybody, for anything.
Who runs that program?
Nobody. It's amazing. It is not, I mean, there is a umbrella, like there's a central office, but it's like a board of trustees. They don't get any outside donations. It's completely self-reliant. It's a miracle. I mean, this organization, I mean, I help many people in my recovery in that program. Just it's not, I don't get paid for it. It's altruistic. It's part of my own recovery that I help others through the 12-step process, because it includes looking at your past, making amends, going back, like making financial amends. You know, it's and just diving deep into our fears, our resentments, our sex conduct, our relationships, and then looking at where we were wrong, because so many addicts are always wanting to point fingers. It's everybody else's fault, and this is you're why I did this. And so the 12-step process is about, no, like I need to own my part, and then I need to make amends for where I did wrong. And then, but the whole point is to facilitate a spiritual awakening, because we need a God-powered personality change in order to change, you know, so.
Totally. Where, if is that only in the States or all over?
It's all over the world, everywhere. It's where you are, it's everywhere.
Okay, so there's a website that you can go, and
there's different flavors, if you will. So the first organization is Alcoholics Anonymous. That's where it all started almost 100 years ago with a book. I actually, I have the book right here. It's all dog-eared because I study this book with many people. This book contains the 12-step process. It says Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. It's kind of become a template. So it started with alcoholism, then it is narcotics, cocaine, emotions, nicotine, gamblers, sex and love addiction, Codependence Anonymous. There's a program called Al-Anon, which is for families and friends of alcoholics.
How did you get into the drugs and alcohol in the first place?
Well, I'm a writer as well, and I'm writing a story for this book. So this book, they've had 4 editions over almost 100 years. They're working on the 5th edition now. In the back of the book are personal stories. So people's experience of what it was like in their addiction, what happened when they found this program, what life is like now. So basically their transformational journey. And I'm working on that story right now to submit it for the next edition that will be published next year. The first sentence of my story is love at first sip, because basically my first drink at age 14 felt like that. It was just like this, I mean, kind of a spiritual experience of, oh, wow, this feels so good. Like I didn't know how bad I felt until I took a sip of this alcohol and felt relief and felt just relaxation, felt something light up within me. And then when I found marijuana at age 16, it was a little more, it wasn't exactly like that, but I fell in love. I fell in love with alcohol and drugs. And immediately when I did that, I was like, this is what I want to do with all of my time, because I felt so bad inside. I was depressed before that. And I was kind of without an identity, with that, like I mentioned, having these crushes on boys, and I just felt very invisible and average. I mean, I was just whatever, I was a normal kid. So once I found alcohol and drugs, my ego, my identity just seized onto that. And then I changed into this other person. My grades suffered, I started getting high every day, all the time, as much as I possibly could. My whole life's purpose. Not that I had a purpose before, because I just, whatever, I was just existing and managing. as a teenager. But once I found alcohol and drugs, I'm like, okay, this is what I want to be doing. And that became the most important thing in my life above anything else.
So it's really that feeling I'm not good enough. I want to be liked. I'm not loved. And then the alcohol, the drugs, and then they numb the senses. And then while you're doing the drugs, and that's what I heard, is that you have this sensation, like spiritual experience, and you can feel connected with others. Is that how that feels? Then that's how that drawn. I guess you were so attracted to it.
That's how it started. But see, that's the thing with addiction. It starts in this way of, wow, this feels so good, but it's diminished benefit over time. The more you do it, the less you get that hit. And then yet you're always chasing those first experiences. And then what happens is the consequences start because it becomes important above all else. And then we start, like I started going before school and smoking pot with people. And, of course I had no money. I was just a teenager. I didn't have a job, stealing from mom's purse or lying about where I was going so I could go get high. And then it becomes chasing this experience that you can never reach again. And then you add more drugs, and then, the consequences build. The progression of the disease, if you will, gets worse.
How did you become aware? Was there anything in particular you did, or it's just a natural progression?
With addiction, it's classic. People are in denial. They don't think they had a problem. I don't know what it was about me. I never really was in denial about my drug addiction. At 16 years old, I remember writing in my diary, pot, which is marijuana, pot is my God. I knew that at 16. I think because I just it just was like that. It wasn't like over 5, 10, 15 years, I just started getting gradually worse. It was like, bam, I was an instant addict. So that was just my journey. That's not everyone's journey.
When you say you were ready for the program, so you did it first time and didn't do much, but the second time you were ready, you say, I was ready. How did you know you were ready? Or is because when you did the program and just kind of made sense?
Well, the first time I was forced into rehab by my parents at 17. So that was external forces. And then, through the course of the year-long rehab when I was 17, I could talk a whole hour on that. It was a Christian brainwashing military. They use military brainwashing tactics. It was like a cult. It was a very horrible situation. But, I already knew I was an addict. So when I got out of there, I went straight to the AA program, the 12-step recovery program, and just started in that and was like, yeah, I'm an alcoholic. I'm an addict. I'm sober. I like being in recovery. But then over a period of 6 months or so, I was 18 years old and I started talking myself out of it. And then I consciously decided I'm going to get high again. I want to get high because, my parents had forced me into this rehab situation. And so I wanted to try and see, how am I on my own? How am I as an adult at 19 that just can use and get high and party like I want to without my parents on my back? Well, I very quickly proved to myself that it had nothing to do with my parents, that it was me, that, I was an addict. And so then I told you, the progression of that with the boyfriend and the running away and the pharmacy and the pregnancy. There was so much in that story that of course was left out, but then I just had hit a bottom. You hear about hitting bottom. Everybody has to hit bottom. You just have to. And the problem is with addiction, and why it's so tragic, is people, they die before they hit a bottom. You can see somebody like, why don't you just stop? You've lost everything. Because that's addiction. You need a gift of desperation. You need willingness. You need surrender. And it's like a perfect storm is the way I see it. And that's what I had when I came back in 1999 at 22, back into the recovery program. I hated myself. Like I said, I was so desperate. I mean, my life was in shambles. I was shattered. My soul was just shattered. And I had all of these consequences. I had 30 years of federal prison looming over my head. I just had an abortion. I just everything that I said. So I had a gift of desperation. I had willingness to listen again, like, is there a better way? So that's what it was for me.
So what did you do at that point? You knew you reached the bottom.
Well, it was external consequences, like feeling like they were closing in on me. I'd just gotten out of jail. My lawyer said, you've got these big drug charges over you. You are facing a lot of, prison time if you mess up, like, you're going to be in big, big, big trouble. So there was these external consequences along with the internal consequences, like the whole story I told about the running away and the boyfriend and the being missing and, being suicidal. So there was all of that within me too, that was just sitting there unresolved, that led to just extreme self-hatred and self-loathing. And, then I have these legal consequences and I get out of jail and they're like, you have to go to recovery meetings. You have to stay clean. You can't use drugs, like, or you're going to be in big trouble. And so my lawyer and my mother both were like, you have to stay sober and clean. You have to stay off drugs and alcohol. So it was these external forces that were pressurizing me into, okay, so I had to go to these meetings. I didn't really want to. So I was out of jail just for maybe 5 or 7 days or something. And I went to a couple meetings, but I was just kind of like, eh. And then on February 1st, 1999, it was a Monday, I went into this AA meeting, into a church. Most of them are in churches. I went in and I'm like, here I am at this meeting, I have to go here. I don't really want to go. And somebody was being the speaker of the meeting, telling their story with alcohol. It was this older man with a white hair and beard. I was 22. I'm like, it's an old man. Like, eh. He just had a boring story about his drinking. But yet at the end of that meeting, in the meetings, we offer chips, little chips that are like symbols of how long you've been quit alcohol. So at the end of the meeting, they're like, okay, we're going to offer these chips now. There's chips for 30 days sober, 90 days, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year. So what happens is somebody's got like, 3 months sober, they can go to the front of the room, pick up the chip. It's everybody claps. It's a nice experience. It shows that this is working. It's a little bit of a celebration, but they also offer what's called a white chip, which is a surrender. It's like white, like waving a white flag, right? So they say, if you are ready to stop drinking, or if you're coming back, if you've left and you're ready to come back and try sobriety again, come and pick up this white chip. And when they offered that, I had no plan, but something inside of me just got up and went to the front of the room and picked this chip up. And I just felt like it was God or somebody, some force. It was not me choosing to do that. It just happened. And I was just as surprised as anybody else in that room, and everybody clapped. And I'm like, okay. And I have not had a drink or I haven't used since.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah, obviously I do. I believe in divine.
Me too.
Yes. I believe there's always something and I believe in everybody like you that we have in this connection, this conversation, there's no accident. And then everyone's in our lives and everything happens for you? So you started a program, everything went just smoothly?
No. I mean, what we say in AA is like, AA is the last house on the block. Nobody wants to go there. Nobody wants to admit they have a problem. It's like, if somebody's showing up to AA, things are not going well. Right. I mean, I was starting from the lowest bottom of my life. It's not like, oh, woo, okay, I pick up this chip and no. It's recovery. It's a process. I craved alcohol for 30 days. Every single day, I just had this gnawing physical craving. And yet I was willing, I was desperate. And the thing is, in AA, in these 12-step programs, people are happy. People have recovered. They love their lives. They're enthusiastic. They're happy. They're joyous. They're free. They're on fire for now, not all the time, but I wanted what these people had. And I would look at them and I'd be like, there's no way they were like me. I was comparing my insides to their outsides. And, I was also young, and they were like adults with careers and cars and houses and mortgages and families. But yet when they talked about their drinking and past, I'm like, wow, they do know what it's like to be where I was. And look what's happened. Oh my God. So that was the hope. And so then I asked, this lady offered to sponsor me and take me through the 12-step process. And I agreed. And so in those early, days, weeks, months, I went through this inventory process. And then bringing back in that earlier story I told about the fear of the HIV, I was taking that secret to my grave. That was my plan, because I couldn't handle it. I couldn't face it. I couldn't tell anybody too. And so when we do this 12-step process, there's a part called the moral inventory. We take a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And that's looking at the resentments, the fears, the sex conduct, and any secrets. So when I had about 3 months sober, I was doing this. And I knew I needed to get honest about that, because our secrets keep us sick. So I wrote that down on my paper for my inventory, but I'm like, it was scary to just write it, but I'm like, I'm not going to tell my sponsor. And yet when we got to the part where so you share that inventory with somebody else, the sponsor, the mentor. And I was terrified. I still remember this from 1999. I still remember. I said, I'm afraid I have HIV, and I gave it to all these people. And I just felt like, oh my God, I want to just die. And I thought she was going to be like, rah! I just imagined the worst thing ever. I imagined she would be like, you need to go get tested. And she wasn't like that at all. She was like, okay, thank you for sharing. You're going to, think about getting tested at some point. That was it. There was so much loving kindness. So, it was situations like this. We have to face our past in order to recover. We can't, as an addict, we can't hold on to all this baggage. It's why it fueled the use, it fueled the drinking. Back then, you had to get tested. It took a week for the results. So I had to wait an entire week. And the result, it was negative, but just the madness. I had done all of these things with this fear that wasn't even real. I ruined my boyfriend's life. My parents, they had missing posters up. They put me on a national missing list. I was a missing person, along with the danger and everything that I put myself through over a fear that it wasn't even true. I did not even have it. So the title of that blog post was The Power of Secrets and Lies, the power of that. So, and then I got to make amends as well.
That is powerful. Yours is really freedom. It's like you were trapped in that fear, and then you were pretty much in prison. Actually, how I call heaven and hell, like what you said about living hell, is when I'm thinking fearful thoughts, when I'm thinking angry thoughts and jealous and all the negative things, I'm in hell. I'm not free. I feel like, well, I'm just restricted and I can't do anything. And when I'm in heaven, is I am thinking or loving thoughts and happy thoughts. For you to go through all these, but that's I guess a gift, right? Now you share the story, and then you help people. So is that what you're doing now? You are a coach, and you said life coach. So you're helping people recover from drug and alcohol addiction. Is that what you're doing?
It's two separate, very distinct areas of support that I provide. One within the context of the 12-step program, which is altruistic, it's selfless service. There's no monetary payment involved, because that goes against the principles of what that program is about. And also I am a life coach in the traditional sense of helping others. In my paid coaching, I do help people with sugar addictions. I help people change careers, get out of dead-end jobs, working on the inner relationship, this personal and spiritual transformation.
Your life been changed because of that, and then you want to give back and you want to serve. The same with myself, and the whole I just truly believe everything's already given. For me, everything is already given. I've been given so much. That's why I have to give back. Do you feel you have a calling, or you're still working on it? What are your perspective on calling in life?
Kind of to continue the recovery story, because that's a part of it. I came into this 12-step AA Alcoholics Anonymous program at 22 years old in 1999, and then started building a sober life, and my whole entire life changed and transformed. And I got, amazing benefits pretty quickly. And yet there was still holdouts. There was still areas of my life that I wasn't willing to let God have. I didn't have that level of desperation. The main one was relationships, was romantic relationships. I'm like, nah, I'll take care of this one. You can have the alcohol and drugs, God, but I'll just keep doing what I want to do over here. So I created a lot of havoc in that area of my life over the years. So it's like when I got clean and sober, I up-leveled dramatically and transformed in many ways. And yet where the areas where I wasn't ready and willing to let go of, I still had, I didn't up-level there as well. So it's like I had this massive transformation, and I just coasted with that for many, many, many years. And so it actually was a few years ago, I had about 20 years clean and sober. And I had like a mediocre existence. I was very self-centered. I was still very selfish. The crux of this program is being of service. And yet I'm like, nah, I don't want to. I don't want to help others. I just was in this mindset of, I need to survive. And I don't have anything to give. I didn't feel that I had much to offer. I didn't feel like I was good at helping people. So I didn't really do it. And so I had I just had like a mediocre existence, is what, the story I tell myself, until about 3 years ago, somebody said, do you want to study this book with me? Do you want to do a study of this, a deep study of this book and this 12-step process? And I'm like, nah, I know this thing. I've been in this program my whole life. I know it. No, that sounds boring. I don't want to do it. He was like, this will change your life. And I'm like, how? Like, no, I know it. It already changed my life. And he's like, no, it will. And I'm like, okay, fine. I'll do this study with this book that I already know. The very first meeting changed my life. because he explained, so addiction is a disease of body, mind, and spirit. It's a disease of the body. The way the drugs and alcohol react in an alcoholic's body. It's a disease of the mind and a mental obsession. And then the obsession saying, I need more, even though there's so many consequences, right? So that mental obsession. And then it's a spiritual malady. We are trying to fill a God-shaped hole that only God can fill. And yet we try and use so many different things, substances, people, experiences, behaviors to fill this God-shaped hole. So it's a spiritual malady. And so the way that you heal the body is by being in this fellowship and the support, this structure of these, the meetings and everything with the AA program. The mind, you heal the mental obsession with the actual 12-step process, heals the mind. Service heals the spirit. When he told me that service heals the spirit, I had this awakening, this aha moment. No wonder my life has been mediocre. No wonder I've only up-leveled to a certain degree. I haven't been of service. And so when he explained that to me, I had this whole paradigm shift in a moment. And so this was only 3 years ago. I haven't been in service since 1999. So that started 3 years ago. This incarnation of me taking people through the steps in the process and dedicating my life to service. And it has totally transformed me in my life. I used to have an office job. I used to work at an office. I was in administration since 2008. And then in 2020, after I'd been taking people through this 12-step process and doing like this mentoring, this sponsoring with many, many, many people, I transformed. I finally got it. I finally got service as the answer. I finally got that, the purpose of life is to give and to help others. I finally experienced that, and that became my life. I never thought I had anything to offer anybody, but now I did. Then I did. So this idea just started bubbling. And then in December 2020, my job of 12 and a half years told me, so I was working remote for 8 years overseas, having this amazing life, living all over the world, working remote, having an American job. It was great. And also it was just an administrative job that I just tolerated. It was not filling my soul. So they told me December 2020, if you don't move back to the US within 6 weeks on your own dime, during the height of COVID, you have no more job. And it was this moment of, oh my God, because my job was everything. It was the foundation of this digital nomad life that I live. I'm like, this job is my existence. I cannot go back to the US. I do not want to live there. I haven't lived there for 8 years. So, this again was God, higher power. I couldn't let go. So it removed my job from me. And so I had just had coaching for the very first time, like 2 weeks before. I'd had a session with a coach. I'd never had received coaching in my life. And I said, I want to be a coach. And it was just such a God thing. In our first coaching session, she gave me the Prosperous Coach book. Very first coach, very first session, gave me the Prosperous Coach, said, you can coach now. You've already been coaching. Go coach 2 people. And I did. And I was like, this is what I am meant to do. And then my job got removed. I'm like, okay, God, I guess I'm supposed to start jump into coaching now, which I did. So I think that might answer your question.
I often tell people that I call God and other people call source higher power. Never give up on us. We are always given opportunities. Yet this time, and Natalie, you had all this, drug issue, you have abortion, you have suicidal thoughts, and you have your boyfriend, and you're living. that's not even the end. Well, I give you all the opportunities and you're not taking it, but then I'm going to give you another opportunity. The same myself too, always giving opportunities. And then just whether we're going to open our eyes and our mind and our heart to see and then to feel and then to experience. And then that's where transformation happens. And I love how you said about letting go. And then you said about you let go of the drug and alcohol, and then you held on to the boyfriend thing and the relationship, romantic relationship. I can do it. I can manage it. And then that's how often we do, right? It's so hard to, oh, okay, you can just take care of it. Even with this podcast thing. At the start, I had an idea, and it was like you're, oh, I'll be a coach and something gonna come. And I thought, I want to serve. What can I do? How can I my prayer is always make me an instrument of peace and love. And I just meditate on it and walk on the beach and ask questions. And then it just came, oh, why don't you do this and share people's wisdom? We all have a gift. And I call God-given gift that's so unique to us. And not only you can share your God-given gift to me, and I can share mine. And we all have if we can all use our gift, and then the world will be a better place. And then it's for you and me, and then the people who have realized they have this gift, and then to share. That's why Let Your Light Shine. I call this podcast is really extraordinarily inspiring stories or conversations from ordinary people like you and I. In the past, I would think, oh, someone so famous, spiritual leaders and wrote so many books and on television or doing all the things. Nowadays, and I look at everyone, you are the same. You are as a person. We are all people. And so we're all extraordinary and we're also ordinary. Back to your story that you 3 years. So 3 years, and then you pretty much, you hit like a crossroad. You were at a crossroad. You were told that you couldn't go back, and now you had a coaching session, and now you feel that you could become a coach.
Yeah. So 3 years ago, like I said, this in a meeting, a 12-step meeting, a man said, hey, I want to do this study with you of this book. And I'm like, nah, I don't want to do that. He was actually the second person. You talked about, God or higher power keeps knocking at our door. And somebody asked me a few years before, do you want to do this study with this book? And I'm like, nah. And so this was the second time somebody asked me again. And finally his enthusiasm made me say yes. And then finally got the message, started taking as many people as I possibly could find through this process in the book, doing the 12-step work. And then maybe after about 6 months of doing this and just being like, oh my God, I finally found my purpose, like to help others, to be in service to others. And I just was on fire. I was just on fire for helping others and being of service, and finally understand this is what's been missing my whole recovered life. The past 20 years of, yes, I've got clean and sober, and yet I was still selfish and and I still am selfish and self-centered, but it's just different now, not to that. Everything's changed, but I still was just existing and surviving and living and doing the best I could. I mean, sure, I had some spiritual growth and all of that, but just whatever, mediocre, as you said. So then, this process found me. I started dedicating my life in service to others. During maybe after 6 months, I'm like, God, I just want this to be my life. I don't want to have to then go to work. Oh, now I have to go to work, which my work was amazing. I got to live all over the world and work remotely on a computer, 30 hours a week. But still, the energy of that job was very dysfunctional. It was very low vibrational. My soul was screaming to get out for years, and fear kept me there, like I said. And I'm like, wow, I wish I could just somehow find a way to make a living helping others. And then this download came of being a life coach. And I'm like, oh, but I'm sure I'm going to need all this training and certifications and blah, blah, blah. And it's going to take years. And, and then a few months later, had this coaching session. And she was like, nah, you can start now, and gave me The Prosperous Coach, which is an amazing book for coaches. And then like 10 days later, my job made this announcement. So I had already coached 2 people. And then I went back to this coach and then I hired her as my first coach to help me to be a coach. And then in the meantime, my job of 12 and a half years, you know, I refused their offer.
That your aha moments, that service, that's the
Yeah.
time when you start to serve, and then
Yes. Like
10
3 years ago.
Yeah, I read a book called The Go Giver.
Oh, I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
It's very similar to that service. The Go Giver is really just to give. Whatever you have is to give away, not to keep. And then that to me, I was the same. There was completely selfish. What's in it for me? You know, everything is I'll grab, and what can I get? Especially marketing mind, it's, you know, everything you do, there's a profit, right? And you do everything is for their business. And then for me in life, it's really, how can I get? You know, I was actually really generous too. I give a lot, but I wasn't. The intention is to give, not to. Oh, sorry. The intention was to get by giving. So, and then
Yes.
until I read A Go Giver, and I thought, wow, that shifted my paradigm. So very similar to yours, and then I realized, whoa. And so my intention now is really to give because I've been given much, not because I want to get. I just know it's already there, and then you will just come. And I don't have to ask or do anything in particular. It just comes just by me serving others. How would you describe yourself? Let's say you have really 3 stages. The stage that when you were 21, 18, you were really addict, to the second stage that you really recovered from all those addiction. You feel free, you could find a job and you live like everybody else. And actually, happily, well, nicely, you had all the things in traveling, to where you transformed and you had that aha moment, and then you're now helping people. If you could paint a mental image for me, what is that? Or even description of Natalie at 21 to 12 years later to 3 years before now to today. It's 4. No, it's 4. How would you describe yourself?
Well, I mean, back in, 21, 22, when I got sober, I mean, it was survival. You know, being in active addiction is survival, just surviving. And, drugs and alcohol were my God. And that was the most important thing. So that was about that, just surviving, living to use and using to live. And then when that transformation occurred, I dealt with all of that through the 12-step process and through, being clean and sober and up-leveled greatly, and then just kind of came to this new normal. The new normal became, okay, now I'm, yes, I still have addictions in the form of obsessions and compulsions around food, around sugar, somewhat around spending, around men and sex and relationships. But yeah, I mean, it's way better. I'm not in this lower level. So, I had a job, I could keep a job. I had my own business. I was a colon hydrotherapist. I was into natural health. I married a man in AA. We moved to the country. We had goats, we had dogs, we had cats. I had a lot, but a life I would have never been able to have in active addiction. And yet it still was very I felt like I was treading water in many ways, because these other addictions were still affecting me. And not to say they don't today, but just they were still very much affecting me. And I was doing the best I can. I mean, I became spiritual. I got into meditation and different things, but it just was, just beginning surface levels, and that's fine. That's where I was. I had an affair on my husband 10 years ago. And that was the catalyst that led me to sit here right now in a foreign country. And again, that was all whatever, driven by addiction, obsession, compulsion, general unhappiness, dis-ease. And so, like I said, this unmanageability in romantic area, the romantic area of my life. That was one major consequence of that, was doing that. And then that was 10 years ago. And since then, it's just, again, been this mediocrity, but yet also acknowledging, yes, now I'm living all over the world. Like, I'm managing way better. Life is good. And also in these areas, it's not so good. There's not a lot of light there. And I just get to have compassion for myself, because I was doing the best I could, as I always am. So that was like that part of my life. And then, this 3 years ago, this transformation again of being of service, it just totally changed my life. It's right when COVID, it was like right when COVID started, everyone goes on Zoom, everyone goes inside, nobody's going anywhere, everyone has time. Hey, do you want to do this process with me? I was just asking all these people, and I got like 7 or 10 people to take through this book in this 12-step process. And again, just the lighting up of that, and then my job falling away. And then it's like, okay, you're going to just be out there, higher power, just like removing that paycheck, that steady paycheck you've had for 12 and a half years. You're now just going to be coaching, living on the edge, and it's just been a deepening and an expanding of the journey, the evolution, deeper levels of trust and surrender that are required. Here I am, whatever, a few years later, I live in this state of doing my best to surrender and trust in every moment, all the time, living and coming from love and not fear to the best of my ability, being as mindfully present as I can, living of service, showing up in service, showing up intentionally, showing up even like I loved how me and you, I came on early so I could log into the Zoom link and then close my windows. But then I take time, I center, I ground, I meditate, I bring in Reiki. I'm a Reiki Master teacher. I set the intention for the space.
Wow. That's so beautiful. Words came to me was, the first word was courage and bravery. And then for me, like I said, again, it's so easy for me because I don't have all the worries, right? And for me to say, oh yeah, I can do all the things. But for you to say, to live on the edge and to not knowing, and then to really surrender, and that's courage. I feel like I also say, come what may. I often say, I have all the things, and if it's taken, and come on what may, it's for my own good. I don't know how I would react, and I imagine I would still, I would still go pray, meditate, and find out what this is all about, and why this, not so much why, how may I serve, and how may I use this opportunity to serve myself and others. That's how I imagine, but I don't know, right? It's when things happen, then you will really know. But for you to already in that space, that's courage to me. Just wow. Before we finish, did you have anything that you wanted to share, or anything that you wish I had asked?
Well, I did want to share, and maybe you were going to ask this, but I do have a podcast about this big book study. So it's called, this book, the nickname for the book is called The Big Book. Those in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, know I have a podcast about this transformation. And the podcast is about me and my mentor, my sponsor, who took me through the process. We are the co-hosts, and we have guests who we are taking through this process as well, and talking about their transformation that has occurred, as well as the transformation that this study of this in the 12-step process has done for us. So we have a podcast about that if anybody's interested about more about that specific part of the journey.
Wow. How long have you been doing that for? A little while?
We did one season.
Okay.
And yeah, we're talking about coordinating a second season as we speak.
Is it on YouTube or on
Yeah, it's on my YouTube. It's everywhere. Apple, Spotify,
okay.
all of those. Mhm.
Okay. Well, maybe you want to send me a link and then I can put that in.
Thanks.
And also you provide a service, right, to the life coaching, and
Mhm.
in addition to this recovery, alcohol and drug recovery. And how can people reach you?
The recovery stuff, like I go through periods where like I'm full, and like right now I'm full. I do have a couple openings for coaching clients. So I have a website, Natalie M as in Mary Speakman.com is my website. You know, I'm on social media. I'm a Reiki Master teacher. I also am on Insight Timer, the #1 free meditation app in the world. So I'm a teacher on there. I go live in there many times, like a couple times a week. I do Reiki. I also do Ancestral Clearing, which is a process of doing forgiveness work around the ancestral lineage that can affect us in the here and now. I mean, that's a whole other thing, but that's very briefly what that is. I'm also do astrology. I do tarot, past life regression, hypnotherapy. So I do all of those things as well.
Let your light shine. Help others find their way out of the darkness. Extraordinarily inspiring stories from ordinary people like you and I. I believe we are all extraordinary, yet we're all ordinary. Let your light shine.